Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. That is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we'll be discussing the erosion of equal rights in Canada, Jordan Peterson's consideration of suing Justin Trudeau, Liberal MPs calling for Trudeau's resignation, 65% of Canadians believing there are too many immigrants in the country, the tight race between Conservatives in the NDP in British Columbia, and Elon Musk's offer of $1 million to voters who sign a petition supporting the Constitution.
Hey guys, we just launched our Everybody versus Trudeau shirts. They're 100% cotton, super soft, sourced right here in Canada, and all proceeds go to support us at Blendr News and just sort of keep this engine running. So if you like what you see, head on over to www.everybodyversustrudeau.com and get your shirt today.
All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got the death of equal rights. Canada's charter favors equity over equality. Bruce Pardy's report, published by the Aristotle Foundation, argues that Canada's legal system protects equity rather than equality, allowing discrimination against certain groups, especially straight white men. He contrasts this with the US legal framework, which enshrines equality through amendments like the 14th. Pardy highlights key Canadian court cases, including R.V. Cap in 2008, which upheld differential treatment for Indigenous fishers, and Fraser v. Canada, when the court determined that even if a law is neutral, it could still be discriminatory if it perpetuates economic disadvantages for certain groups. He warns that Canada's legal focus on equity risks excluding individuals based on race or gender, as seen in Toronto Metropolitan University's medical school policy, which reserves 75% of its seats for equity-deserving groups, aka non-white people. Is equality under the law in Canada a thing of the past?
Well, yeah, I think it's becoming pretty obvious, right? In addition to social fragmentation, the permanent victimhood that this creates within a large portion of society, the legal and ethical ramifications, massive economic consequences that will sort of be a knock-on effect of everything here. And of course, this is just racism repackaged. It's what it is. You can't have one. You can't suppress one group and then say it's because we're equaling things out. You're actively being racist against another group. In addition to all that, this is permeated into every government organization and led to the complete erosion of meritocracy in our country. Now you're seeing it in medical schools where they're not just prioritizing DEI hires, DEI enrollment rather, they are throwing out things, standardized testing like the MCATs. So in a very technical field, they're saying the actual technical aspects don't really matter. It's just your lived experiences. But again, like this, will have very real consequences for Canadians. So yeah, the country's kind of fucked. This is ridiculous.
So there's actually a part of our Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms that permits discrimination under certain circumstances. So Section 15.2, it says, Subsection 1 does not preclude any law, program, or activity that has as its object the amelioration of conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups, including those that are disadvantaged because of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. So essentially what our charter says is discrimination is not okay unless you discriminate in favor of groups that we deem okay to discriminate for.
Right, and that was Party's entire argument going, hey, this is what our charter says, and now we've seen a couple cases practically applied where this is what's happening. Like you said, with the men and women, they were saying like, even if there's nothing there that's inherently favorable towards one group, if the other group actively does not participate on their own accord, this organization is still a problem. Basically, if it's against anybody but straight white men, is what the thing actually said. Those aren't my words. And you're seeing another one. It was with Indigenous fishing. They're like, well, only they can do it. It's like, okay, you may see that as a bottle issue, but what that leads to is, again, favoring one group over another in this country. And it kind of goes back to the point of like, you're seeing in all those areas that I mentioned and how this is sort of degrading society. But it is backed into with concert or our charter, and it seems like law at this point. And that's why I say, like, I joke, I'm like, oh, the country's fucked. It's like, no, it is, because you're seeing it practically apply already. That's what I was mentioning. And again, you back into the charter, you go, oh, there's legal grounds for all this. So we actually don't, this is not equality for all. That's not what this is about. So, I mean, how much longer do you want to stay in this country? Because you're the target. So am I.
And there's just so many flaws in our Constitution, that being one of them. Another one that I think we've mentioned on the podcast before, about how even our rights to freedom of expression and privacy and mobility and all this kind of stuff, which is pretty much the first part of our Charter of Rights, right afterwards, it says these essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but these can be taken away if deemed necessary for social protection or the greater good.
Which is what you're seeing. A lot of things pop up right now. You're seeing things like the Future Pact Agreement. You're seeing things like the the Pandemic Preparedness Act. You're seeing a lot of these. Basically, you look at the Constitution or the Charter or whatever, and you say, okay, this is the set of rules. And then what these politicians do is they create new rules to basically supersede or change how these things are perceived or how the country operates. And you're seeing things like that pandemic agreement that are going to exactly what you said. Well, the charter says we can do this. Now we have a law that says we can do this. So you guys don't have any rights because we say you don't, because climate change.
Yeah.
Basically.
And like the point I was going to bring up there is that you don't have rights if they can be taken away under circumstances.
Very good point.
They're privileges at that point. They're state-sanctioned privileges. Yeah. This is something that even, America's Constitution is definitely better and more bulletproofed than ours for when it comes to providing individuals with rights. However, even then, like, you go look back at what was happening in like the world wars, for instance, dissenters, people that said in like handing out pamphlets and actively trying to be like, America shouldn't get involved, blah, blah, blah. They put people in jail for that at the time. So like, even they are very much like, you can have your freedom of speech as long as it doesn't interfere with our objectives. And then, but circling back to this whole equity over equality thing, first, I think it's really important to break down the distinction between the two, because equality means that we would have the same view under the law. The law applies to you the same it does to me.
Yes.
Whereas equity means that it believes certain groups should have, that across whatever groups you want to distinguish should have the same outcomes.
Yes.
Now that is extremely different, because now you have to bend the laws to get.
Well, it's impossible.
Yeah.
First, you and I have discussed this. You have to go to the lowest common denominator. You and I talk about IQ sometimes. So if you think about equity, and we're going to have an IQ test, and let's say person A's got an high IQ, 140, 150, and this other person's got an IQ of 100. Well, the person with an IQ of 100 can't possibly pass the test or to the same level that the person with the 140, 150. So what do? Well, we have to go to the lowest common. We have to bring everybody down to 100 to create equity. That's a very simple way of looking how this falls apart and what this looks like for the nation. And I recognize that's just academia, but take that and put it across every sector of every market. And this country's it's a socialist communist nightmare. Like, what are we even doing here, right? Like that's what this becomes, right? And look, I want to be clear. I don't feel like a victim at all. I don't feel hard done by. My life is what I make it. I don't feel like I am being put in a bad situation because of our charter. I might be one day, but currently I don't feel that way. And I don't feel like I need any favors or anybody to do anything for me. I just want to say that because that's not where my frustration is coming from. My frustration is coming from what this does to the nation on a macro level, and it makes it untenable for the people that, for a majority of Canadians.
The reason that I don't like it is, not because of personal circumstances. I know you and I are very similar, where we see obstacles as opportunities, and we're like, let's go, like make it harder. I want to be the guy, like, you put a barrier in front of me, I want to be like, I can jump that.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't want a low bar. However, the thing that really, I guess, ticks me off here is not necessarily even the macro stuff. It's just the pure hypocrisy. And actually something Peterson, we'll get to him later on, but something he's mentioned before is that many people think that it's just truths and then untruths, right? You're either right or you're wrong. But he's added another distinction, which I think is really good, which is anti-truth. So these are things that are not just wrong, but are so wrong that they're actually hostile to the truth. And so when it comes to this, like, okay, we're doing all of this in the name of justice. It's like, we're going to discriminate in the name of anti-discrimination, right? So like these kind of things where you're like, that's what bothers me, is it's just pure lunacy, and it's actually hostile to truth itself. And then, but one of the things too, I think Thomas Sowell nailed in regards to all of this equity conversation and such is that he said, when people get used to preferential treatment, equal treatment seems like discrimination. And so you can see this with, so for instance, I think the best example of this was the New York Orchestra, where they, back in like the 90s, I believe it was, they implemented blind auditions because they said, well, our judges that are in charge of deciding who gets into the orchestra, they could be biased towards certain groups and not allow those people into the orchestra. So we're going to make people audition behind a curtain, essentially, kind of like the whatever that ripoff of the American Idol is. But anyways, after they continued to get different outcomes, because yes, even certain groups do like go towards classical music differently. Like even in for instance, in the Asian community, I was talking to a girl that grew up in like a very traditional Chinese household recently, and she was like, yeah, like it was expected of us as a kid that we would learn a classical instrument. So when that's ingrained in the culture, like of course you're going to have more people from that subsection than say from Harlem, where classical music isn't even valued. Like nobody listens to it there, let alone plays it.
Right.
And so this gets to that point where they go, okay, we need to do this because we need to stop discrimination, and this will get us the outcome we want, which is equal outcomes.
Yeah.
And then they put that in place, which was the right thing. I have no issue with blind auditions.
No, it is. That's how I think of most things should be done. Meritocracy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then they still didn't get the outcome they want and go,
of course not.
No. Okay. You know what? Before we need to take away the blind auditions, and now we have to factor in there.
Of course, because it did, like you said, it didn't get them the result they wanted. They figured we've got the fix here. Everyone's just racist. Nope, not at all.
Yeah.
Very few people are shitty. That's just what it is in that particular way. It's just now we're all being blanketed with these labels, which is insane.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Jordan Peterson denies Trudeau's claim that Russia funds him and considers legal action. Dr. Jordan Peterson is pushing back against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's unsubstantiated claim that he received funding from Russian propaganda outlet RT. During testimony at a foreign interference inquiry, Trudeau suggested that RT paid influencers like Peterson and Tucker Carlson to promote destabilizing messages. However, no evidence was provided, and neither was named in the relevant U.S. indictment. Peterson, denying any connection to RT, criticized Trudeau for making false accusations and is considering suing for defamation unless Trudeau issues a public apology. So isn't it ironic that the leader who is covering for traitors is accusing one of the brightest minds to ever come out of Canada of being a traitor?
What's that thing the liberals do where they call you what they are to put you on your heels, so then you got to defend it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a little deflection. Like I don't know how much he's colluding with Russia necessarily. China, it seems to be pretty obvious. But this was interesting. As soon as I saw this, I don't know who I was talking to. I was like, I would not want to make an enemy of Tucker Carlson and Jordan Peterson going into election season. Absolutely not. What an insane thing to do. Their reach is 100x what your reach is. And you've got nothing. This is a baseless claim. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if Jordan Peterson, here's what this is. I think Tucker Carlson couldn't give two fucks. I think he's like, who? Who's that? Said that? I don't care about him. I'm good. But with Peterson, he's been quite wronged by this country in a lot of ways, especially right now, what he's going through. It's kind of funny, actually. They were going to do this whole social media re-education thing, but no one will do it. Like, they can't find anybody to re-educate him because he's like, oh, I'm documenting this whole fucking thing.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh, I can't do it. I wouldn't do it. Are you kidding me? That's hilarious. So anyway, the whole thing's preposterous. I'm glad he took that approach because I think it got him the result he wanted. In this particular case, he may let it go. He may just be like, you know what, the guy's already a sinking ship. Who gives a shit? Or he might be a dog with a bone. If he's a dog with a bone, you could see this turn into a bit of a mess for Trudeau. Because like I said, Peterson's far more intelligent. He's got a much, much larger reach. And he's proven that if he wants to make something of an issue, he really, really can. And based on what we just saw with this whole like re-education camp thing, he just made the entire institution look like a bunch of idiots. So, I mean, I imagine he can do the same here. Not that Trudeau necessarily needs it. But I guess we'll see how it turns out. At the end of the day, I never mind seeing Trudeau get slapped for being an asshole. So, I mean, I'm down for it.
Well, I think Joseph Goebbels said a very political strategy, a very effective political strategy story back in the 1930s while he was propaganda minister for the Nazi regime. He said, accuse the other side of that which you are guilty. Again, it's like it puts people on their back feet. All of a sudden, if I call you stupid and you just turn back around and say, you're stupid. You do sound stupid.
You sound real dumb.
But we already kind of saw this play out with one of the people at the Counter Signal. I can't remember her name, but one of Trudeau's ministers, it was a Liberal MP, I believe it was Mark Gerritsen, accused her of being a Russian paid propagandist, and there was she started, and actually, the Counter Signal led a lawsuit against him and just said, hey, we'll stop as soon as you issue a public apology. And so he did have to go on all his social media channels and be like, I shouldn't have done that. And she's not a Russian propagandist. And it's like, that is just as big of a win as a lawsuit, if anything.
I think so. But here's the trick for everybody. You don't call them a propagandist. You ask them if they are in a very accusatory manner. Then you're fine.
Yeah.
Then you're fine. Are you? That's 100% would be my approach. I mean, I don't really play that game, but that would absolutely be how I handled it. That's jokes.
Well, too, and it's also like, it goes to this whole Russian paid propagandist thing, right? So, okay, Trudeau suggested that RT paid influencers to promote destabilizing messages, where in reality, it was the exact inverse of that, where people that were spreading messages that destabilized Trudeau's regime were being organically were being shadow funded by RT.
Yes.
They weren't coming and getting talking points handed to them from RT.
No. That's actually a really good point, a very good distinction to make. But it still does kind of blur a line a little bit. Like you said that there's sort of a duty on, like, I think it was Tim Pool. You're like, he should know better. You should be doing your research and being like, hey, where's this money coming from? Because here are the ramifications of this. I agree with that. I actually do agree. Like when I look at the situation, I'm kind of like, yeah, I could say that morally or ethically, it's not the right thing to do to take money from, say, Russia to promote these messages, even though they may be your very own thoughts. I'm not really sure that there should be any legal ramifications, and there was none. There was none. But no, I think that's a very important distinction to make. But again, it's these things like Trudeau sits there and he's got to twist words and manipulate the truth and do all these things to just create a media narrative. Do you know how many people come to me and are like, you'll talk from an older generation, like my parents' generation, they're about 70. And they'll say the things that Trudeau will say like it's fact. I'm like, oh my God, like that's how well this machine works. You guys have done no critical thinking and you're pretty sure that Trudeau's the king of the world and that all these people are being paid by Russia. Are you fucked? But it works, and they know that it works. So it's the best way to consider anything you hear coming out of Trudeau's mouth is the narrative that 50% of Canadians, maybe not 50, but that's the narrative that generation of people that are not taking in alternative media or using social media at any real scale, that's the only one they're getting, and that's what they believe. Mm-hmm. And that changed my perspective a little bit because it changed my approach. Because it's like when you're having a conversation with someone, they come at you with all this information they think they have, but they have, a sliver of it and it's been distorted. So you can't just argue because you don't have the same subset of data. You're not arguing over the same thing. So what I started doing is I started asking people questions.
Yeah.
I'm like, explain that to me. Tell me more about this. And then that's when they either start talking in circles or it becomes a lot easier. Because if you just give them other information, they're like, well, I've never heard that, so therefore you're making it up. I heard mine on the news from Justin Trudeau. I know I'm right. Going, oh my God. So anyway, it's just something to consider, something that I've sort of picked up on when you see this kind of stuff.
No, for sure. And I think that's actually an issue with all people on both sides of the political aisle, is that there is a lot of people that even if let's say they might even have the right perspective on something, they might have a good view of the situation. But if you can't explain why you have that view, mm-hmm. it instantly discredits your entire thing. So it's like, if you're going to voice something confidently, like make sure that you have that you can at least go 5 arguments deep on it.
Yes.
If you can beat if you have 5 back and forth where you can be like, okay, I can answer this at a couple different levels, mm-hmm. you're pretty much going to be able to handle yourself in any conversation that resembles that.
Yeah, I actually found, so my approach prior to recent has been like, not a headbutt, but like, no, you're wrong. Here's what's going on. And not in that, maybe not necessarily quite as crass, but what I mean is like, I would say like someone the other day was talking about price fixing rent, and I'm like, for commercial units. I'm like, look, there's so many problems with this. And I start going down this hole, and I see their eyes glaze over. I'm like, oh, that's when I realized, I'm like, I need to be asking you questions because I don't even know how much you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I say these things and you cannot tie these things together. So this is actually it's not a good way to actually have this discussion with you. So for guys like you and I that have to pay this much attention to things, why I think it's valuable asking questions is, if you tell me that price fixing commercial rent is a good strategy, you say going 5 deep. I can have a conversation with you for 2 hours about it. So it's like you and I have such a comprehensive look of some of these things, not everything, of course, but some of these things, especially in the news world. So when you ask questions, they help lead you down the right line. You know what I mean? Because there are 20, 30 different lines we can go down. And if I just start trying to scramble it all together, you just sound like a fucking madman. You know what I mean? The guy on the whiteboard drawing fours. Like, so for me, that's helped me kind of go, okay, why do you believe? What do you believe? And how much do you know? And when I ask, I can walk you down the right path to then explain this to you. So anyway, again, I think that might be a little bit more of an evolved strategy, but it's sort of agreeing to your point. If you're going to go down any of these lines, have yourself 5 to 10 deep so you can cover yourself. Otherwise, like you said, you're parroting a talking point. You don't know what you're doing. Yeah.
And actually, I had somebody reach out to me, send me a message kind of asking for help on being like, how do I get people within my social circle to become more accepting of these ideas or perspectives, or at least just entertain them. But like, I try to bring them up and they just shut off, or they get angry or whatever. And I'd say like how I
find new friends.
Well, I conduct myself very differently online than I do when I'm having a one-to-one conversation with somebody, because online, I am sitting there going, I'm talking to a camera. I'm not talking to any one specific person. But when you are talking to an individual, you do have to understand, and this is different for every single one. There's not like a pattern that you can just map onto everybody where it's like, okay, what do you think? Why do you think the way you think? And then I can actually, once I understand you, actually, it was Carl Jung who said, one cannot wish to be understood without having far-reaching comprehension of the other's view. And I think that is entirely right. Like you have to.
That's a good way of wrapping up what I was saying. That's actually quite smart. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you can't expect somebody to understand you if you don't understand them.
Right.
Like what mutual ground are you operating on?
Yes.
And actually, this is one thing too, is like, give people credit when in those conversations. Like I know online I'm very just like, this is a dumb idea, blah, 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 blah. But when I get in front of somebody, it's like, oh yeah, I can totally see how that perspective would arise, and like be like, hey, this one point that you made is actually a good point. It kind of helps my perspective on things a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you tell them your perspective, they're more likely to reciprocate that exact same behavior and go, yeah, okay, I can also see how you got there, rather than you just being like, you're wrong. Like, it's kind of like, it's kind of that whole theory that like the world reflects how you
communicate,
operate,
mirrors,
into it, right? So I think that's one of the things too. And then asking questions is great because it makes people confront their own illusions.
Yes, their own understanding of the situation, and then they have to explain it. So there's this thing that happens when you have your own ideas and you don't express them to other people. The human mind tends to go from step 1 to step 2 to step 10. You skip a lot of the stuff in between. But when you have to explain it to me, well, now you're forced to go through 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Once you go through everything, well, now it's Swiss cheese. Now we've got holes everywhere. Now it's easy to kind of, and a lot of times you see them yourself. But this isn't just a good strategy for maybe having an argument. It's also a good strategy for your own ideas. Like say if you have a business idea or whatever it is, to talk through the whole thing with somebody, because then you do see all of the issues and you do see all your blind spots. So yeah, it's just an effective way of kind of working through stuff in general.
For sure. All right, moving on. We've got Liberal MPs to call for Trudeau's resignation at the next caucus meeting. Liberal MPs have spent the past 10 days quietly organizing a plan to call for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to step down, with the push expected to come to a head this week. According to sources, the formal call for his resignation is set to be raised at the Liberal caucus meeting on Wednesday, October 23rd, which is the day that this podcast will be released. So will Trudeau step down, or is his God complex too large?
So I think this is sort of a Biden 2.0 situation. I don't think he's actually going to run. I think he may drag it out as long as he can, and then they maybe swap a candidate in with not as much time for the media to kind of shred them apart. I think that might be one of their plans. And I think the way he gets there is just figuring out whether or not he can manipulate these MPs, or swaying them rather, to drop their grievance. So you kind of look at like the people that are actually in charge, and it's like 5 or 10 liberals that are really kind of running the show. You know, it looks like there's 25 to 30 MPs that are going to be signing this and trying to oust Trudeau. And I think it all comes down to how much sway do these 5 or 10 people have over the other 30? And then can they convince them to drop this grievance? And with what? What is the reason? No, guys, we're not going to do this right now. We're going to implement someone like, Mark Carney or someone like that, or whoever, but we don't do it now. Now's the wrong time. Here's why. And if you convince them and you can get them there and whatever, well, Trudeau buys himself some time to continue doing what he's doing. He's got to do all this great work. Still work to do, he says, still work to do. Kind of sounds like Biden sometimes. And then, it also gives Trudeau time to see if he can rebuild his brand equity, because I think his ego is one of the largest in the country. Mm-hmm. And so if he can buy himself time with a false promise to his MPs to be like, don't oust me now, we're going to fix it, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And I feel like this is the game he's played with these guys repeatedly. We're going to do this. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. Come election time, I still don't think he's going to run, but in his own mind, he might think there's an opportunity. So, long story longer, question, is his God complex too large? It is. And if the power structure at the top can convince the other 30 or so people to back down for a promise in the future, he'll stick around.
You know what's funny is in politics, I think a lot of the times, if let's say those party insiders wanted to oust a leader, like we just saw kind of with the Democratic Party down in America, most of them are able to come up with effective enough threats to actually make that person step down, right? Whether it be, we have this dirt on you, or we're going to make your life incredibly hard in XYZ way, or whatever, some sort of threat. But what's funny with Trudeau is it almost doesn't work, because you could be like, we have this information that if we release, there will be a massive scandal. And Trudeau's like, I weather those 4 times a month. What are you talking about, dude? But, you mentioned there too how Mark Carney has now announced that, yes, he plans to enter politics. And he's kind of playing coy with questions about it, saying, well, I don't know when that will be, and blah, 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 and can't make predictions. And it's like, okay, obviously you're positioning yourself now for
he's a great institutional guy. He's the guy they wanted. He's the institutional democracy king. Let's go.
And this is what I was saying is like, this would, I see some conservative takes being like, oh, this is this would be the death blow to the Liberal Party, because you're just putting another, a guy that's even more globalist than Trudeau into power. And yes, Mark Carney does international finance. He's very big in the climate finance world, whatever the hell that means. And he spends a lot of time in Davos, right, with the World Economic Forum people. But the thing with him is like, yes, he would just implement more of the same policies. However, he's an infinitely better salesperson than Trudeau, because he's actually intelligent. Now, again, that doesn't mean he's right or that he would be good for the country, but he is smart enough to defend his bad ideas, where Trudeau, his only play has been, well, if you don't like my policies, you're racist, or you're sexist, you're misogynist.
Enough. Yeah. Says the privileged white guy.
That defense has worn off. Like he's used it way too much, where now it just doesn't stick anymore.
Well,
that
was what he said to these guys. All these MPs that are pushing back. He's like, they're just not progressive enough. DEI, guys. DEI. Yeah. What?
But
what's that even mean?
So, like, for instance, a great example would be when a reporter asks him about his deficit spending, and Trudeau says, well, the budget will just balance itself, or excuse me if I don't think about monetary policy, right? Yeah. He's showing that he has no idea, but Mark Carney does have a good enough understanding of these things to be able to at least out-argue whoever's attacking him.
Well, actually, now that I'm thinking about it out loud, it just kind of just popped into my head, is the more insane that Trudeau becomes and the more stuff that he does that you and I might deem extreme, and a lot of people might deem extreme, it gives Carney an opportunity to jump in and be like the rational liberal. I'm going to bring it back to the 90s, guys. Everything's going to be okay, even though we know that they're incredibly poisonous and he's a very dangerous individual. When it comes to sort of the global agenda, which you and I are 100% against, and so should everybody else. So it actually isn't a bad strategy if you think about it from the Liberal Party's perspective. Also, let's not forget what I said earlier is everybody believes what they hear in the media. Trudeau's this rational. They already think he's somewhat rational anyway. He's this guy that's just misunderstood. He's doing his best, blah, 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 blah. So you bring in a guy that is, actually rational or can portray himself as such, and he's got these media tools that the Liberals currently have. It could be quite challenging. It could be like you could see the race in Canada change pretty dramatically. You know what I mean? And I think it's just a matter for them to decide when is the right time to drop him in. Mm-hmm. Is it now? Is it in 6 months? Is it 4 months before the election? I don't know. They'll know better than me. But now that we're talking about it, it's probably the play.
I remember a month or two ago when they first announced that Carney was becoming an advisor to the Trudeau administration, that I said to a friend that's very involved in, keeps up to date, and he is very intelligent when it comes to news and politics and that kind of stuff. But I said to him, I think they're positioning Carney to step in if Trudeau gets ousted, and he battled back at me at that point. And I think he was right. I just I wasn't giving them enough credit. Where he said, he's like, that's such a stupid idea. Even if you want Carney to come in as Trudeau's replacement, they shouldn't be tying him to his administration in any way. To your point, where you can be like, okay, now I can position myself as an alternative. Yes. But because the last month or two, he's been inside of the administration, you're like, it's much harder to now position yourself as anything different when you've been working with them hand in hand.
Yes, true. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be had that what we were saying earlier, they won't let him oust. He won't be ousted. He'll go, look, guys, I'm going to step down in 4 months on my own accord. Stop beaking off. We're done. And he'll say, because if I'm ousted, the Liberal Party's done. But here's the plan. Carney's going to come in 4 months. I'm going to pass the torch because he's already, like you said, tied into the administration in some way, shape, or form. So if he's ousted, the party seems very unstable. But if Trudeau can weather this storm and everyone goes, yay, Trudeau, yay, Liberals, yeah, we're all on the same side. And then he does step down on his own accord, he can save his own ego and he can go to the UN or some shit like that. And then Carney comes in and it's a smoother transition. Because you gotta like, the Biden Kamala one was a fucking mess because Biden, it was after he bombed in that debate that everyone's like, yo, dude, you can't pass anymore. Like your diaper's on the outside. Like, dude, so it's that bad, right? So I think they'll learn from that. And I think that having him ousted by 30 MPs is as bad as Biden losing that debate. It makes the party look really bad. So I think if I'm the Liberals, my strategy is, I hear you guys. I understand you're upset. 4 months from now gives us 8 months to the election. Here's the plan, blah, blah, blah. Get in line. Shut the fuck up. That's what I would say. That's what I would do.
Yeah. I think they've already kind of bungled it a little bit because I think they should have. Yeah, I think they should have tried to keep them a little bit separate, even if that was the play behind doors, to be like, okay, this is how we're going to stabilize ourselves in that movement. And like, because then Trudeau could be like, you know what? Yeah, I have made a couple mistakes, but this guy right here, he's rock solid. We've really spent the last 6 months recruiting, trying to find the perfect person. Yeah, but they can't do that narrative anymore.
Well, the thing is, I don't blame them for bringing him into the spotlight because they needed to test him with the Canadians. They needed to test him in the media. How do you like this guy? Because the thing is, you make this mistake of going, Kamala Harris, everybody. And everyone goes, what the fuck? Swearing a lot today. You needed to test, like she polled terribly all the time. She was the lowest polling VP. This to me was the most insane thing the Democrats could have done. They had an opportunity to put in someone that polled well if they'd handled the situation properly. So if I'm a Liberal in Canada, you bring in Carney, what do people think? Do they think that he's like, kind of a rational 90s Liberal? Do they like what he's saying? Does he resonate? Is he a problem? They do like him? Okay, great. But if we don't test that water, then we bring in the next guy that everyone hates, like an Aaron O'Toole as a conservative. I'm like, what are we doing? It's just as bad as Andrew Scheer. They're both wieners. Now, neither one of them are leaders. So you look at it and you go, oh, fuck, the party's got no chance, right? So, for me, I actually don't mind their play. I think it's, I see the issues, But if you go cost benefit, which one's, what's the better play here? I don't mind introducing them to the public. I think right now, I actually think their playbook's not in a bad shape.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got poll finds that 65% of Canadians say there are too many immigrants. A recent Ledger poll reveals that a significant majority of Canadians, 65%, believe there are too many immigrants in the country, marking a steady increase in this sentiment since 2019. Only about 21% think immigration levels are about the right number, while a mere 2% feel there are too few immigrants. This growing discontent correlates with rising dissatisfaction towards the Trudeau government's immigration targets. The belief that there are too many immigrants is particularly pronounced in rural areas, with 69% saying so, and compared to urban areas with 62%. So, rough estimate, what percentage of Canada's problems stem from too much immigration?
I think the better question is what percentage of each issue stems from. So, like you look at housing, significant role, because we're letting in so many people every year right now. I think based on our math, 2.5 people per home, 1.5 million people coming in every year. You need to build 600,000 homes a year just to house the new people coming in. And we're building about 250. So that is so significant. That is a massive, massive part of the problem. Easy to see that. But you look at things like the economy and, the cost of living. And don't be fooled. I want to point something out. People say, well, inflation, Jonathan, is down under 2%. First of all, there should be no inflation target. That is insane. Second of all, inflation is a comparison to what it was the year before. And it's been sky high for a very long time. Yeah. It doesn't mean the cost of living is reasonable. It's way out of whack. Back to things we've said several times. The cost of living for a family of four outpaces the income for a family of four, which means every year the average Canadian family is going further into debt. A lot of this is driven by it's a supply and demand. It's pretty simple. So again, pretty significant. You look at healthcare. Our healthcare is the back of the bus. 10th out of 10 in prosperous nations in primary care. How much is immigration playing a role in that? I can't say. I would say it's a reasonable chunk, but not as much as housing. So definitely plays a role. Unemployment, highest it's been in Ontario in a super long time, especially for young kids, right? And not to mention, many of them stay unemployed and can't find steady work for up to 2 years. Over 60% can't find steady work for up to 2 years. So we just have to cover their costs. And then you look at even the cost to house these people when they get here. Forget about the ones that can try to make a living. We're giving more per immigrant to be here, or asylum seeker, I should say, a refugee, whatever. More goes to one individual asylum seeker than the average family of four makes in a year. So, look at the astronomical costs of that as well. Crime. It's pretty clear. Hell, even road congestion, you could argue, is significantly worse in densely populated areas because, I don't know, our relationship with the U.S. has deteriorated because they're like, you're letting in a ton of terrorists in the border. What are you doing? You know what I mean? It's because we have no vetting process, and we've seen several cases pop up where these people are tied to pretty serious terrorist organizations. It's created a massive, massive political divide in this country. It is one of the biggest wedge issues. Well, actually, you know what? It's like, as we're seeing now, it's 65% of people don't agree with it anymore. But for a long time they did, and you're seeing what it's done to Canada and many other countries. And also the cultural erosion. Look, people argue all the time, and I say this too. Canada's got no culture. What is it? Hockey and hot dogs. Great. But there's a commonality within our culture. Yes, we are ethnically different, and yes, we may be the most multi-ethnic, but we have common ground. That's why we get along. We can see things the same way because we can find some sort of cultural connection. To your point earlier, you try to find common ground with people, but we're losing that because of this mass immigration, and the low threshold of letting people in this country. So what percentage of Canada's problems stem from too much immigration? I would say a significant portion of them, and a significant portion of those problems is from immigration itself.
Yeah. So a couple things to touch on there too. I think one that misses out as well is unemployment, because we've seen the temporary foreign worker program vastly expanded. Now, they've said that they're clawing back on that, but really what they're doing is just offering a quicker pathway to permanent residency for those people. But that even Trudeau himself in 2015 was arguing against Harper using the temporary foreign worker program and saying it causes wage stagnation as well as youth unemployment. So that is definitely a thing, because we've seen youth unemployment pretty much double over the past couple of years. Now, I think part of that also would probably stem from, and this isn't like, I'm not shitting on them because we haven't done them any favors when it comes to getting them ready to enter the workforce, but our youth is just becoming less and less competent as well. I mean, you ask somebody to break change for you without a calculator these days, and they fucking short circuit at a counter. So that would also probably contribute to unemployment. But then, you made a good point about how inflation is measured to the last year, right? So it's like, if inflation was 50% last year, that's a very over exaggerated number, but let's say it was 50% last year, and then it still just went up a little bit from that. You could say it's only 2% higher, but you're like, but it's still, compared to 3 years ago, it's much, much higher than 2%.
Exactly.
And then there's also the added thing to think about when it comes to inflation is the consumer price index. So what they do is they take kind of an aggregate of a lot of the common things that people need, such as groceries, or car insurance, or car costs, or housing, and all of this kind of stuff, right? The important consumer items, and then they measure those to the prices of those in order to find out the number that inflation is. But what we see a lot of the times too is that when there is an item that grows at a rate that doesn't benefit what they would like to say inflation is, they just take it out of the equation. And they're like, okay, we're just not going to.
Oh yeah, they manipulate the hell out of the CPI. It is wild, but it's all narrative-based shit. You know what I mean? 100%.
But then when it comes to immigration and how much we're spending on those people here too, right? You did a rant I think a week or two ago about foreign aid spending as well, right? So since 2018, Canada has spent $52 billion on foreign aid. And 20% of all of our foreign aid goes to refugees in other countries. So that would be $10 billion since 2018. We've spent on bringing refugees from other countries to here. And then that point that you brought up about how much we spend on them once they're here. So that needs to be added to it as well. It's insane. But yeah, so I think immigration, I've said it before, is like, I think you fix two problems in our country, and you at least start righting the ship on 80% of our issues, which would be mass government spending and mass immigration. And those two are also kind of tied together, right?
They are in a big way,
we've seen. But the last thing I wanted to touch on as well is like Canadian culture. So a lot of people think culture is so much deeper than, and not to pick on you, but just like the hockey and hot dogs thing.
I don't feel picked on. It was sort of a joke.
Okay, no, but this is a very common idea when it comes to Canada. You see the radical left wing people be like, Canada doesn't have a culture. White people in general don't have a culture. Everything they have is stolen. Then you also had Trudeau say in 2015, right, about how Canada doesn't have any mainstream identity, right? But what culture can be thought of is a social order which enables man to increase his productivity and to enjoy that increase. And so culture goes into also our legal systems. The idea of like equality before the law is part of Western culture. That's unique to Western culture across all human history. Then also even just things like, our freedom of speech, that is part of our culture. But when you see people say that we don't have a culture, you can assume that they not just want to do away with the more trivial things like, say, Tragically Hip or hockey or whatever,
hockey,
right?
And hot dogs, bro.
It's like, they're not just saying that they want to do away with that. It's that, if you don't have any culture, then we also don't need to respect your fundamental rights, which are part of your culture.
Yeah, for me, it's just like there's the underlying culture is how Canada gets along, basically. That was kind of my point. So, one thing, though, I will say after the rants are, I'm not against immigration.
Yeah.
I'm actually for immigration, but I'm for immigration that scales up, that scales up alongside our infrastructural capacity. At a pace that we can actually allow people to integrate into society so these things don't become a burden. All of these things are because of mass immigration, not because of immigration alone. If you let people in at a pace that would not affect the economy as much, that would not affect housing, that would not affect healthcare, that would not affect unemployment, all of these things, and maybe that's zero for a while, given how out of whack things are. Totally cool. Maybe it's deporting people for a while. That's fine too. But I'm not against it. I'm against it when it comes at the cost of everything that Canada already has. That's kind of my point.
Yeah. And I think I shared a graph the other day, and I think if you want to see it, you can find it on our Twitter. But it was from Stats Canada, and it shows the level of immigration, right? It's like for the last 100 years, we've roughly put in, like, depending on the year, it always fluctuates, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 to 250,000 people per year.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see in 2019, they talk about like the hockey stick graph with climate change and be like, oh, this needs to be addressed immediately. We need to wreck our society in order to deal with this problem. But you look, it's not even a hockey stick. It's literally just a 90-degree shoot up to 1.2, 1.5. And we were talking about it the other day as well. We know that they manipulate, things like CPI in order to get the inflation number to where they want it to be.
For sure.
But we also know that it's like, or we don't know, but we can assume it's like, okay, how much is, say, Stats Canada allowing, like, pulling back on certain numbers? Like, is immigration higher than they really tell us it is?
Well, we know that there's about 500,000 illegal immigrants in the country as it is. That's their numbers. That's probably higher too. So those people aren't accounted for in those lists. 100% it is. I think a lot of it's unfortunate, but a lot of politics comes down to manipulating data. But anyway, so overall, it's a huge issue today. We have to backtrack significantly, like you said, cut government spending, which is doubled under Trudeau, and really curb this immigration issue right now, because all of the things we mentioned are all being harshly affected by it, right? So there's really no other way to do it. There's no way to play catch up. And my housing example is a perfect example of why. Because if you just need to build houses for the new people coming in, you need 600,000 homes a year already, and we're not even halfway there. So it's pretty clear what we have to do.
All right, moving on. We've got BC election remains inconclusive as Conservatives make historic run. The BC election results are still undecided, but the BC Conservatives, led by John Rustad, have achieved significant historic gains, especially among minority voters. As of Sunday night, the Conservatives were elected in 45 ridings, while the NDP secured victories in 44 ridings, but is projected to win 46 seats, a decrease from their previous 55. The Greens held steady at 2 seats, with 47 seats needed for a majority. So if the NDP wins a single seat more than the Conservatives, does this mean both parties will effectively be handcuffed by the Greens, despite them only having 2 seats, because their vote will be the one that just tips the scale one way or another?
That's essentially what it is right now. Yeah, like there's sort of this game of tug of war happening right now in the background, and some of it is kind of bleeding through the media, that they're just vying for those green seats. What can we offer you? What can we offer you? And it'll be kind of interesting to see which way the wind blows there. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know anything about the Green Party initiative. I know very, very little other than the environmental side of things. So I don't really know what their appetite looks like, or what they want, or what they need to be promised. I mean, it's kind of a precarious situation. There's a reason they only have a couple seats, whether it's federal or provincial. But they're in a power position in BC, which is wild. So we'll see how this all plays out. It just comes down to, well, providing the recount doesn't give one party 47 seats. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, it's interesting if you kind of look at the last election results in 2020. Like, the Conservatives were a non-existent party, the Liberals were significant, the NDP had 55 votes, but I think it's the splitting up of the Liberals, half going to the Conservatives and several going to the NDP, that actually is the only reason the NDP have a chance right now. It's actually also surprising to me. So I'm going to go a little off topic. No, I'm going to stay on topic. Different province. I am surprised, given how BC is being run and the things that are happening, that this many people still voted NDP. I'm genuinely surprised. I don't know if it's a symptom of media control, or if this is what people actually want. And, maybe you and I are in a bit of a silo and we just don't understand Canadians. Like, I don't know. This is quite surprising to me. But it's the same thing you're seeing over in New Brunswick. The Liberals just won a majority government over there yesterday. And it's I looked at sort of the foundation of her platform, and I agree with a number of the changes she wants to make. I actually do, but I'm still surprised that it's a liberal majority. So what I'm kind of getting at I'm thinking on a macro scale is like, is the media doing such a good job of convincing people that the Liberal Party or the left-wing groups are still the solution to Canada's problems and to have a more prosperous or maybe better country? Maybe not prosperous, but better country. Is the media doing that good a job to convince people? Or is that what people actually want? You know, maybe it's a combination of both. I don't know. I was surprised. I was surprised that to see the NDP look like they could win and to see a majority government that even the newspaper was like, it's kind of a surprise to see a majority Liberal in New Brunswick. And I know some of it stemmed from the issue with children in school, with the pronoun thing. And New Brunswick was like, no, you need to involve parents in this situation. And that was voted against essentially by voting in a Liberal. So I don't know. I'm struggling right now.
I think a lot of it is straight up people don't even know, first, what is happening, right. Second, what the solution should be to the things that are happening. So they just get fed these slogans that sound nice. And this happens from both conservatives to liberals, all this kind of stuff. Just like we were talking, no matter what side of the aisle people are on, they typically don't have a lot of depth to their arguments. But you know, I think the most notable thing with this was how her campaign featured a platform with 100 promises pledging $1.29 billion in new government spending over 4 years.
This is New Brunswick.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. With the Liberal electee in New Brunswick. Well, let's put it again in entrepreneurial terms, not even political for a second. If you're sitting there in your business and you go, here is a 100-point mandate that I want you to hit, you don't have a strategy. You have a wish list. Like you can't you're not going to hit 100 different goals in that period. That's way too many.
Yeah.
Focus on one or two of the main issues. Like this.
I'd even say go with 5.
Yeah.
I'd even give you 5.
Well, actually, yeah. I say you use the 80-20 rule here, right? Focus on the 20% of your problems that are causing 80% of your headaches.
Yeah.
Get rid of that 20%, and then you have such a smaller pot of problems to deal with.
Yeah.
But that's not what they want to do here. They're just like, hey, we've got 100 promises to fix every single problem in the world. And then you also see like, okay, and we're going to spend more money to fix those problems when one of those problems that's the 20% causing them is government spending.
You know what's interesting, actually, though? I believe the Conservative in New Brunswick has run a surplus several terms in a row. Like he's done a reasonable job. So he's like, I'm going to go spend the money he saved us on all this other shit. Let's go. That's kind of what I was seeing anyway.
Yeah, but so this, to quote again the GOAT, Thomas Sowell, he said, you'd take people's money quietly and then give them back pennies loudly and then expect a cheer, right? Like again, I'm paraphrasing them, but that's exactly what they're doing here is they're bribing voters with the voters' own money.
Yes, which is insane. So, I mean, I guess, so back to the question, it's like, do we just have a liberal, so I saw this, so when I started asking this question, obviously Trudeau, but more recently was Olivia Chow, lifetime NDP. We know she stole money from the people. It's out there. The information's available. She and then another liberal woman who was, I forget, she was like the right-hand woman for Tory when he was in. So you got the NDP and the liberal. Between these two women, don't care that they're women, they just are women. It's irrelevant. They basically soaked up like 80% of the vote, 75% of the vote in the Toronto mayoral election. So Toronto wanted a hard left-leaning, in this case, whack job. But they voted for it. They voted for this woman where if you looked at her public record, you're like, that's not great. This is what they wanted. And I just kind of go, sometimes I ask myself, am I in the wrong country? Because am I not a part of the majority that want to see this place get better? Instead, I'm a part of a minority that want to see those things. And the majority just want to continue living in a welfare state. And I don't know, but that's what it feels like when I see shit like this happen. Like in BC, that province is fucked right now. With the things that are happening there and their spending and the drug problems and all, they have become like the pilot project for all the nonsense that's happening in Canada. A lot of it anyway. Like I don't understand how they voted NDP. And then, again, I don't know enough about the New Brunswick situation. I do know the Conservative was kind of a little lackadaisical in his approach. He was kind of just banking on, I've been here, I know what I'm doing, I'm running surpluses, everything's good. And he lost, but she won a majority. So I kind of go back and I go like, are we living in a country where the majority of people, like, are you and I speaking to the minority every day thinking we're speaking to the majority? We're trying to rally troops, a lot of times with the things that we say and the things that we do. But the truth is the majority of Canadians want this socialist state. And maybe they do. And I need to come to that realization. It's important for me to come to this realization because I don't want to try to convince people that aren't interested. In fact, I don't really want to convince anybody of anything. I want to give you the information and you can make your own decisions. That's actually what I want to do. But my point here is, you think about an uphill battle or fighting a war, doing the things you're going to do. If you already know you're going to lose, why play the game? Why bother? Why am I doing this? Why are you doing this? If we know that there's no chance because of what Canada wants at scale, what are we doing?
Well, I think it could be the difference between, say, us keeping our integrity. Like, I think if you are sitting in a burning room and nobody notices and you just say, well, even if I say something, nobody's going to do anything. Even if they are, like, that doesn't mean, the lack of other people taking action shouldn't reflect on your willingness to take action.
It's not about that. It's about knowing it's knowing you can't win at all. Like, this is a game where you want to see things get better. My MO is to see this country get better and for it to fix itself and for us to have, I don't really love the political system. In fact, I hate it, but it is what it is. Sometimes we have to make choices because we're playing a game Monopoly already. We can't change the game. So learn the rules and try to win. That's kind of how I see a lot of these things. So I've learned the rules and you and I are trying to win by having these conversations in a lot of cases. That doesn't mean I'm going to stop. But what I mean is there, if you already know you're going to lose, you can't meet any of your objectives. Back to being an entrepreneur. You get into business to win, to become a success, to have people purchase your product or whatever it may be, to change the world, to blah, blah, blah. If our impact is literally, guys, you're screaming into an echo chamber because too many Canadians want a socialist state. Don't waste your time. You know what I mean? Like that's now, again, it's not saying that I'm not going to keep doing this. I'm asking the question, is this a trivial pursuit?
Well, I guess it depends on what your goal is. I'd say if your goal is to, change the nation, then it is a trivial pursuit because I don't think that anybody, no matter what their goal is, in which way to change it, they're going to get their ideal way.
What that again, I'm not trying to get I agree with what you're saying, but I just want to clarify. It's not about me getting my way as much as the country's falling apart and there are some objective things that we need to do to fix it. It's the way it is. It's not that it's not the vision that I have, but it's not for me, it's for the nation. That's all.
Yeah. And so I guess the way that I'd look at it is, I think we've talked about this before, where like, for me, one of the main reasons that I'm doing this, I'd say it's not the only reason, but it's definitely the top one, which these are the messages that mean the most to me. When people reach out and say, yeah, my friends, my family, I can't get through to them, like that guy that we were talking about earlier, but like, thank you, because listening to you makes me not feel crazy.
Yeah.
So like, even if I can't change anything on a macro scale, just giving, say, individuals reassurances to be like, okay, I'm not crazy, because it is easy to get gaslit in that, where you can say to people, be like, oh, this is how I see the world. And everyone's like, you're crazy. But then sometimes all it takes is that one person being like, no, trust me, I see it as well. And then they can go like, oh, okay, because for a second there, I was thinking I was crazy maybe.
Yeah, I got a lot of that through COVID. A lot of people come up to me like, hey man, you helped me realize that I was not batshit crazy and that the world needed to chill the fuck out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like 100%.
I guess this is the way that I'd look at it too, is, so let's say, and this isn't my view, I still do think you can turn things around in Canada. But let's say we both believe that the situation is terminal. Take it to an individual's life. Like if your last days are terminal, like, okay, well, do we want to go down either fighting or enjoying ourselves, or still like having some semblance of enjoying those last days? Or do we want to just sit in a hospital room staring at the fluorescent light, being like, yeah?
It's not exactly. So for me, back to your point, I got a lot of that feedback from people through COVID saying, hey, like you helped me realize I wasn't batshit crazy. So I can certainly appreciate that. I think a better way to look at this is, do I shift the target? Because I am a macro type of person. So in building businesses and doing the things that I do, I realize like I'm a scale thinker, and that's how I like to operate at that level. I like to think of things in terms of mass impact. I do appreciate what I can do on a one-to-one level. I think that's very important. But the way that my mind operates is, how do I make change at scale? That's how my mind thinks. So if I'm talking to a bunch of Canadians that see things the same way as us, that's great. I can appreciate that. And it's nice that they know that they're not going crazy. However, if we can't actually change the country because too many people want to see this become a socialist welfare state and that they can live off the government and whatever, if that's what they want, doesn't mean that I don't keep having conversations, but it means maybe we change the target for the people. You know what I mean? Maybe it's not about trying to stay here and fix it. It's about, where do we go and what do we do? You know what I mean? Maybe it's changing the narrative and the conversation to be like, hey, I still want to help people at scale, especially all the people that are listening that do feel the same way. But if this isn't the solution, what is and where is that? And how do we get there and what do we do? And I think that's what my mind is kind of doing. I'm going, right now I'm on this war path, but if you know you're going to lose all your men, you keep going. I think that's again, that would be a trivial pursuit.
Japanese samurai, bro.
Right. Yeah. I would have got myself. No. So, or do I pull back, change directions and go, hey, if we flank them from this side, or if we take this approach, this is how we can kind of get what we want or get to where we want. And that's kind of the way I guess that I'm sort of seeing it. I mean, reality is I'm not going to stop this until the federal election's over in 2025, assuming it doesn't happen sooner. It won't happen sooner than 2025, but I mean, next October. If you get conservative government in, I think it's going to be very important for us to pay attention to how Poilievre behaves, what he does for the country, how things start shaping up and what he changes and what he doesn't change. And I think it's important that we report on that. If, however, he loses and you end up having a Mark Carney liberal government, I think at that point it's like, okay, pull the troops back, we're going this direction. And I think then my fight continues, but it continues in a very different direction.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this could be the goal then, is to blow up Blendr to such a success on, even say on an international stage where you can be part of that more global conversation per se, and make enough money that we can go buy a little island and invite some of the people that are still sane there.
So we landed on we're going to start our own country.
Yeah,
cool.
No, but you know
that
I mean,
idea. But I get to be king. Already a ton of problems. Oh, God. All right.
Last story for the day. We've got Musk offers voters a chance at winning $1 million to sign petition backing the U.S. Constitution. Can it be legal? Elon Musk, a vocal supporter of Donald Trump's presidential campaign, has committed at least $70 million to help Trump and is now offering a $1 million daily giveaway to voters who sign his PAC's petition supporting the Constitution. Some election law experts are raising concerns, arguing that linking cash prizes to voter registration could violate election laws. Do you think this violates election laws, or does it fall into a gray area?
So I actually think it falls into a gray area because of how it's being marketed. So if it's framed as a giveaway, if the giveaway is framed as an incentive to promote civic engagement, which is how I'm perceiving it, rather than a direct reward for voter registration, it falls into a gray area, which is exactly, he's been pretty careful with his language. It's exactly what this is. It's the PAC's petition to support the Constitution. Doesn't really have any, like, you have to be a voter to sign it, but it doesn't really have anything to do with motivating, like it does in the background. It's pretty clear that it will get people to register to vote if they aren't already, definitely. But this thing exists whether they do that or not. So I think he's created an interesting gray area. And for $1 million a day, I wish I could sign it.
Well, yeah, because he's not the only one, but Stephen King, who is genius writer, but politically insane, especially on X and stuff. But so one of the things that he tweeted about was, okay, well, now Elon Musk is just openly paying people to become Republicans. And it's like, no, you just have to be a registered voter.
But yes.
Like even Musk has said on stage, like very publicly about this, like it doesn't matter whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent.
Yes.
Like as long as you just sign this petition, you have access to this draw.
100%.
And so to me, I see that as like, hey, if you want to get people out to vote, then that's the goal.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. That's a really good perspective, because even if your argument is, well, it's driving people to register for voting and that's illegal. Yeah, both sides. All three sides if you have independent. Yeah, it doesn't discriminate. It's $1 million. When $1 million looks and smells the same, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, they don't give a shit. So yeah, 100%. Like this could be perceived that way, but it's sort of an equal advantage. So again, and also I think that by the time this finds its way into the legal system, it's too late.
Well, and it's funny to think about the contradiction. This just popped into my head, so sorry if it comes out wordy, but right. So the common theory with, say, Democrats in the States or liberals here is that they're using mass immigration as a way to create a one-party state because those people will be more favorable to them to vote, right?
Yes.
So taking taxpayers' money to import a different demographic that will bolster your political movement isn't a problem to them. However, an individual using his own money to promote just voting across the board is somehow infringing on the electoral process.
Right.
You're like, where the hell does this logic come from?
They don't have any. They just don't want you to be able to play their game. But the thing is, they'll also still try to create more voter turnout by offering food and coffee and things like that. So where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, if you give someone a coffee, then that's the same as, you're deciding, obviously $1 million is worth more, but you're both, the incentive's there. Come out, have breakfast, have coffee, that happens everywhere. That happens all the time. So how can you do anything if you can't do that?
That's true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack, and every subscription will help us create our island where we. But yeah, no, any support helps us out very much so, and keeps this engine running. So thank you for those who already have, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.